officers find the Rosemont apartment where a male white suspect, 37 years of age, who had a relationship with the female victim at that location. He started pounding on the door about 4:30 in the morning, sometime early morning. The woman resident went to the door. Upon opening the door to come outside to speak with him, he forced his way into the location with a gun in his hand, threatening him. At that point, the victim's husband, who was in the location as well, came out of a room when our suspect raised his gun and started threatening that individual. Both victims were able to safely get out of the apartment and contact the police. Subsequent to that, Austin police officers responded, recognizing they had a barricaded armed suspect. The officers called for SWAT appropriately. A couple of hours into our incident, we had our negotiators talking, engaging the suspect, which is consistent with our protocol. As you will know from having been at that scene, it is a highly populated area, and our officers were in a pretty tactically in a bad situation. Suspect came in and out of the lanai area or the balcony area several times with handguns in his hand. At one point, the suspect came out with a high-powered rifle with a scope, which caused one of our officers, one of our SWAT officers, to fire at the suspect. Our officer fired because he recognized that his partner officers were in a compromised tactical position, and they were in danger of being shot upon and being killed. A suspect was struck once and retreated into the apartment. Within an hour or so, we were able to get the suspect out, get him into the hospital where he has undergone surgery. The evidence has shown in this instance that the subject did in fact, and what is good about having our folks at the hospital, that all the physical evidence, including the evidence to the injuries to his arm, his forearm, and to the side of his upper torso, is consistent with our officer's statement that the suspect was raising the high-powered rifle and aiming it at our officers. Again, this is a situation that is that I'm proud of because our officers responded in the way they were trained, and obviously they were very, very, very restrained in their response. I want to thank and apologize at the same time to the community. I know that it's very difficult for folks to have to be disenfranchised basically for half a day, a full day, but our goal ultimately is to get people, keep them safe, and resolve the situation without the loss of life. And again, it's been a fortunate day for us that no lives were lost. With that, I am going to just throw in one other thing, consistent with the process that we're setting up, and as part of our transparency philosophy. The police monitor did walk through the location with us and was able to see, because you can't really appreciate the dangers officers were facing, the shooting position of the suspect, who had the high ground, as well as a secondary position with another high-powered rifle that the suspect had set up in a jimmy-rigged tripod situation that was pointed at the location where our other officers were responding to. So we're very fortunate this happened, that this incident ended without the loss of life. With that, I'll open it up to questions.
Chief, was there any evidence that the suspect was trying to commit suicide by cop?
All indications are that this was a suicide by cop situation. The suspect was in contact with family members and made it real clear that he was intended to die, which is his intention to die this morning. The suspect does have a history of attempt suicide in the past. He does have a history of violence, and he has a history of contact with the Austin Police Department. Suspect is a former military, a member of the military, who obviously knows how to use weapons and was an extreme threat not only to the police officers but to the people in that facility.
Are you releasing his name?
We will not release it till later on today because we are in the process of trying to do a positive ID from one of our witnesses, and we don't want them to hear the name because that could jeopardize the identification.
So early this morning, witnesses said that there were they heard two shots being fired at the scene.
I will tell you this, the preliminary indications of the investigation are that the suspect did fire a round with a handgun inside the location. We have pretty solid on that, and our one officer did fire 2 shots at the suspect when the suspect posed an immediate threat to our officers and to the people in that location, the people living in their homes. Because as you know, high-powered rifles have one heck of a penetration, and no matter where you're at, you might be concealed, but you definitely, there's very little cover in terms of the material that these houses are made of.
So the officer fired 2 shots at the suspect?
Yes, sir, and the suspect did fire 1 shot that we're aware of at this time inside the location.
What was the distance separating the officer from the suspect?
Say again?
What was the distance separating?
I'm not going to get into the distances, but I will tell you this, that tactically it was a very challenging situation for our officers because the suspect he had the high ground. If you know anything about military or anything about tactics, when you have the high ground, we're here from Texas, where we know what happened at the University of Texas many years ago when we had one ex-Marine with a high-powered rifle. It took many lives, and this situation kind of reminds you of that, where you had a suspect with a high-powered rifle on the high ground and our officers at disadvantage in the low ground and really exposed. The female, thankfully, is not injured. She has escaped unharmed, as was her male husband.
2 shots that you said the officer fired, did both of those hit the suspect?
Preliminary indications are that only 1 shot struck the suspect.
Where was the suspect is?
The suspect, again, this is always subject to change as we move forward. I want to make that always clear to you all. But it appears from the physical evidence and the injuries that as the suspect rose up, we have a through-and-through wound through the forearm here, through the arm, and then it continued and it struck the right side of his chest, which is consistent with what our officer's statement is, that the suspect comes out into the entryway there, the doorway, brings the rifle up with our officers down there, and the forearm.
Could you reiterate, you said that the suspect actually